Been a lot of talk about sanctions this week, but this op-ed stuck out to me. Quote, if Putin doesn't fear Western sanctions, his cronies might. It focuses on the powerful network of oligarchs that are both the product of Putin's power and in many ways the source of it, members of the Russian elite that Putin made rich and powerful. The article notes that, quote, Putin is ready to weather the storm, but with the rest of Russia, the Russian elite in particular, be ready with him. Well, if Putin won't back down here, could it be possible for the West to sway the minds of his allies? Joining us now is the author of that op-ed, Elizabeth Shackelford. She's a senior fellow on U.S. foreign policy with the Chicago Council of Global Affairs and a former U.S. diplomat. Elizabeth, thank you for being with us tonight. I want to ask you first about the construct here. This was at the end, the fall of the Soviet Union. There were all sorts of things that led to a small group of people getting remarkably rich out of what was the collapse of the communist system. There's some sense that as a result of getting rich, particularly at the hands of Vladimir Putin, some of these people are they're in his thrall, that they either owe him money or they pay him money or they have to keep him happy. So if you sanction them, you will have some effect on him. Is that true?
Well, that's the theory, but it really depends on how you approach the sanctions. I mean, sanctions are a very tricky tool of foreign policy, and they only work under certain circumstances. Now, you have a patronage system in Russia like you have in a lot of countries around the world. Vladimir Putin is not, all powerful. He needs people to keep him in power where he is, and that's where the oligarchs and the small circle around him come in. And the idea of trying to take a multi-pronged approach with sanctions where you both target the economy broadly, which is going to both impede Putin's ability to continue funding his war effort, but then also target the people who are closer to him. I mean, we realize now that we are not going to persuade Putin to change course. So the question is, who has influence over him? And it's a small circle of people who have gotten very, very wealthy off being around him.
But we have tried some version of this since 2012, starting with the Magnitsky Act and then sanctions that were put in 2014 and then more sanctions in 2018. To my untrained eye, they've had zero effect on him. He's become more aggressive as a result of the sanctions over the last 10 years than less.
And that's a very fair criticism, and a big reason for that is because the sanctions have been quite limited in who we've been targeting, how close we've gotten to Putin himself, and also the approach that oligarchs use to hide their money. Right? They use family members, children, and businesses that aren't declared to hide their money and use it in a lot of Western cities and capitals as well. So those are the types of issues that we're going to have to address. One of the changes that we saw with the Biden administration in their sanctions that they announced earlier this week is this starting to target the family members also. But I think that there's going to be need to be a bigger push to seize assets of these oligarchs in places like the United States, like the UK, and we're only seeing little bits of that so far. But they're very good at hiding their money. But we just have to be more determined about finding it and making it not available to them.
When you're in a building, you see those fire stations, the fire, things on the wall that say break glass in case of emergency. Feels like an emergency. Why don't we break the glass and go bigger? Why not remove them from the SWIFT system?
A lot of people are asking that question. Now, sanctions are the various tools that you can use they're complicated. Experts right now are debating, how much of a bigger deal would taking Russia out of the SWIFT system be? And frankly, at this point, I don't think that I agree with you. It's time to break the glass in case of emergency. And whether or not it would be a huge step above what we're already doing with certain banks and sanctions against them, I think that there's really no reason at this stage not to. But the pushback is a lot of it is related to Europe's dependence on Russian gas and oil. And the fact that things like the SWIFT system and other approaches that they have avoided so far, like directly targeting the energy sector, we're not doing that because it's going to have an impact on civilians and citizens in the West, including in the United States. You heard President Biden a couple of days ago with the first announcement of sanctions to say that he's trying to do everything he can to make these really have an impact on Russia, but not have an impact on American citizens. And we know that European states are taking a similar approach. The problem is the sanctions will be most effective if we go all the way, and that's going to require some sacrifice of other countries.
Right, because you can't take them off the SWIFT system and you can't sanction their energy sector without that making the price of oil and gas go higher for every person in the world who buys oil and gas. Elizabeth, good to have you here. Thank you for joining us. Elizabeth Shackelford is a senior fellow on U.S. foreign policy with the Chicago Council on Global Affairs and a former U.S. diplomat. Thank you for your time tonight.